Today's session is the second part of a two-part series on designing an effective SEO experimentation program for greater ROI. This is part two, which is on how to run the best experiments and how to learn from the results. So first up, what is an SEO experimentation program? What does that mean? And anyone who was here for the first session will recognize this, but we're talking about a structured approach to hypothesis-based testing for the organic search channel. Structured, meaning there's a plan, we're setting goals, we're defining expectations on things like testing volume, aligning on what metrics are being prioritized. This is what the first session a few weeks ago went into more detail on. So yeah, I've got a link in a minute to the replay of that if anyone's interested in that. Nextly, it's hypothesis-based testing, and this is going to be the key part of what we're talking about today. But hypothesis-based testing basically meaning there's strong SEO reasoning for how the change being tested will impact organic traffic. It'll either impact click-through rate or keywords ranking, page ranks for, or rankings for those keywords. Having strong hypotheses means it's easy to prioritize, you have the best chance of a strong impact rather than a kind of more sporadic, see what happens approach. It also means you need a robust testing methodology and you can control for external factors. And finally, we're talking about organic search. We're talking about an SEO experimentation program. So we're mostly interested in measuring organic traffic. We can monitor other metrics. We can use like GSC ranking and click-through rate data to add explanatory power, and conversion metrics and revenue metrics are key as well. But when we're talking about setting up an SEO experimentation program, the main thing is applying that scientific methodology to organic traffic and increasing that. A little bit about me before we go any further. I am a senior consultant and lead onboarding specialist at SearchPilot. It means I've worked with brands like these, among others, to set up experimentation programs and give them sustained success in their SEO testing. Before getting into the SEO A/B testing about 5 years ago, before that I was a technical SEO and analytics consultant. So I've been in the industry for about 9 years overall. And the last 5 years has been all about designing experimentation programs, figuring out how to make them work well. Within SearchPilot's professional services team, we have come a long way in that, and we've seen the value in having that structured approach and getting our customers on board with that. Our customers generally come to us because they want to create a culture of experimentation, or as a company, they have a culture in their UX teams, their product teams, their ad teams, and they want to reflect that in their SEO as well. And we generally think of a couple of different persona types within these companies. We deal a lot with the SEO teams who are busy getting their hands dirty, doing the day-to-day tactical stuff, coming up with test hypotheses, reporting on results. And then there's the more senior stakeholders, so CMOs, VPs, that kind of level, who are looking at it from a wider perspective. They're more interested in potentially the experimentation culture, being able to rely on provable results from the SEO team through experimentation programs. And yeah, like I said, this is part two of a two-part series. Last time we talked about setting goals and reporting on success. There's a QR code here on screen and a link if anyone who wasn't there last time, wants to check out that after this. And then today we're focusing on how to create strong hypotheses, so how to validate the impact of your SEO changes, and how to analyze test results to draw insights from them and plan for improvements, basically to run the best tests and to make the most of the test results to feed into even better tests. A quick deviation into the methodology before we go any further. So before we get into how to create the great test, it's important we understand how SEO experiments are run generally. This is how we do things. Any SEO experimentation program will have very similar underpinnings if they're doing things right. So yeah, I'll do a kind of whistle-stop tour of this, go over it quite quickly. The previous session, I went into a bit more detail on this. But the first really important thing is that we need to divide a group of pages on the website into two statistically similar groups to account for external factors like seasonality. This is the way that we can make a change and know that any results we see are a result of the change we made and not seasonality, algorithm updates, etc. And we're splitting pages, not users. So we want to measure the effect on Google. There's only one version of Googlebot, so we bucket based on page and ensure that each page's traffic levels are attributable to that bucket within the test. We then deploy the change to the varying group of pages and compare its performance in terms of organic sessions against a forecast. And we use that statistically similar control group of pages to build that forecast. It means any deviation between those two groups is because of the change we made and not some external factor. And then we look at the cumulative difference between the two buckets. So if this line is going up, that means it's a positive change. And then the shaded kind of fan region around the line is the confidence interval showing the statistical confidence that it's a range of outcomes, not just that midpoint. And that's how we run one test, but we're interested in a testing program, experimentation program, over the course of months to years rather than an individual test, which is over the course of weeks. Last time I spoke a lot about how we measure the results from experimentation programs and how to report on goals. So yeah, like I said, take a look at those slides and that recording to go into more detail on that. But all of this is about building an engine. Individual tests are great, but we want an experimentation program that runs in a sustainable and self-propelling kind of way, like an engine. And this is what we're going for. This is what a strong experimentation program should look like. I'm not expecting anyone to digest that all in one go, but we're going to go through it step by step to try and get to that as the end goal. And the first part is creating strong hypotheses to make sure we're testing the things that are likely to be most impactful. Then we've got a section on analyzing the results to make sure we're getting the most out of all the tests we're running. And then iterative testing is, I think, maybe the most subtle, but the most valuable outcome of this kind of engine approach to make sure that every test outcome is valuable in one way or another, even if it's not necessarily a positive test result. So that gives us 3 sections that I'll go into today: creating strong hypotheses, analyzing results, iterative testing. So what is a hypothesis? Put simply, a hypothesis is a statement of what you're planning to change and what you expect the outcome to be. We have a specific formulation that we use at SearchPilot of how we kind of write our hypotheses that I will go into a bit more detail on as we go through. But why does a hypothesis matter? Why don't we just try a load of things? Because that's the alternative here is the SEO team or whoever wants to run the SEO testing program has a load of ideas and we just run through test, see what works, what doesn't. The issue with that is the weak hypotheses lead to poor experiments. Even if the result is positive, you can't draw reliable conclusions from which to form permanent changes. So you don't get as useful insights out of that. The benefits of a strong hypothesis, on the other hand, are you have clear follow-up actions for any given outcome of a test. So you know if this test is positive, here's what we do next. If a test is negative, here's what we do next, and so on. It gives better prioritization of tests that are most likely to have a significant impact. So we run the most important tests first. And it sets clear expectations for all stakeholders of what the likely outcome might be of a test and what it means if that likely outcome doesn't show up. And in the last session, I showed these charts. These are the metrics that we always recommend tracking for experimentation programs: the volume of tests, the number of tests you're running over a given time period, and win rate. And it's the strength of the hypotheses that really feeds into win rate. You can't have a strong win rate if your test hypotheses aren't good enough, aren't strong enough. So going back to the formulation of hypotheses, we use this template. It gives a clear structure that ensures all tests have solid reasoning behind them and a measurable impact. So we start with what we know, the background to a test. We move on to what we think the impact of that change would be. And then we end by stating what we'll test to be able to measure that impact. So we're going to go into more detail on each of those steps now. We start off with what we already know, like I said, what we know that something. And this can be grouped into four areas and four sources of what we know of knowledge to feed into it. Fundamental SEO principles, market and audience data, competitors, and previous test results. So starting off with fundamental SEO principles, it's statements such as, we know that Google values EEAT. We know that adding more relevant keywords to on-page content can improve performance. We know that improving core web vitals can have a beneficial impact on rankings. We know that link equity, internal link equity, is important for SEO. So this is all of that, like key SEO knowledge that you have, and all the background that goes into why you'd want to run a certain test. This is also where things like updates and like the Google leak from last week feed in to testing. Algorithm updates, it will be, okay, here's what the industry as a whole thinks has changed, or here's what Google has said has changed as a result of this algo update. And we feed that into the testing that we're doing. With a Google leak, it could also be, here are the factors that it's all a bit speculative at the moment, but here are the factors that are in this document that we think are part of the ranking algorithm potentially. Let's test them. Let's feed those into test ideas and test hypotheses. Next section is market and audience data. So this is things specific to your website or your industry that you know about from either research you've done before, data sources that are unique to you. So things like, we know there's more search volume for terms containing a given keyword. We know that conversion rate is high on these pages. So even if the net impact isn't positive, if we can funnel more traffic towards this subset of pages, that's a priority for us. Or we know that the majority of search traffic comes from mobile devices, let's say. So tests that focus on mobile specific hypotheses might be more impactful for your site. Competitors. So this is looking around your industry and around the SERP to see what is working for other people. We know that the sites outranking us for this keyword group have particular features on their pages, and we should test introducing those. We know that a key competitor has a weakness in a particular area that we can exploit, like they have bad reviews or they have weak content on the landing pages, and we can target that as an area to beat them. Or we know that we can differentiate from the competitive landscape by including something in our title tags, let's say, that other competitors just aren't using. So there's a gap there that we can exploit. And then the final source of inspiration and the thing that feed into test hypotheses are previous test results. It could be that you've run inconclusive tests with other variations of a particular change, but there's hints in the data that point you in a certain direction. It could be that you've similar tests on other websites have seen positive results. You might have read about that. We're lucky at SearchPilot that we have access to a range of websites that use our platform, and there's often kind of cross-pollination of ideas across that. Or it could be that you've signed up to our newsletter and you've read a SearchPilot case study where there's been a test that we've run that we've spoken about publicly with a beneficial impact. So all of these are things that could inspire a test hypothesis, and it's important that we're relating the test that we're about to run back to some data source, whether it's received knowledge from the industry, whether it's a Google statement, whether it's data, whether it's a previous test. But none of this guarantees a positive result. Just because the hypothesis is strong and it's grounded in solid fundamentals doesn't mean that every test will have a positive result. It just means you have more clarity behind your ideas and then explain things. If the result is not positive, you have reasoning why that is. And then we've got what we believe, the second part of the hypothesis statement. We believe the impact of this will be something. And it's really important for SEO tests that what you're testing has a clear link to SEO outcomes. There has to be a mechanism to translate the change that you're making to an impact on traffic. This is a mistake that a lot of people who are new to SEO testing potentially fall into. There's improvements that you can make to the page, but linking it back to a way that impacts traffic isn't always part of that. But what that means is it has to impact one of these three things. These are basically the only ways you could impact organic traffic. Either you're targeting new keywords that the page previously wasn't ranking for at all. You're improving rankings for keywords that you were already ranking for, but you're just ranking better as a result of this change. Or it's going to change the appearance in the search results. So it could be that it's a meta description that changes your search snippet. It could be structured data that gives you a rich snippet. If you're not ticking any of those three boxes with the hypothesis, it's not an SEO test. It could be a good thing to do for other reasons. It could be a good conversion or user experience test to run, but it's not an SEO test. And a lot of test hypotheses will tick multiple of these boxes. It could be that it's a content change you think is going to be good for your rankings and for the keywords you rank for. But yeah, if you're not ticking any of the boxes, it's not an SEO test. So let's look at a fictional but a concrete example of this. Let's say you've got a site with kind of local pages for plumbing, and your title tag format generally is plumbers in city, plumbers direct, which is our fake brand. The we know that section would be, we know that there is more search volume for city name plumbers than plumbers in city name. So it's one of those data and research based hypotheses. So based on that, we think we want to move the city name before the word plumbers to see what the impact of that would be. So the we believe part of the hypothesis would look something like this. And you'd consider the positive and the negative potential outcomes of that. So on the positive side, it could have a positive impact on traffic if the new title tag improves CTR because you're matching the phrase that people are searching for, and they might be more likely to click as a result of that. It could have a positive traffic impact if the new title tag format ranks better because it's directly matching that high volume search term. On the other hand, it could be that you're truncating the title tag. There could be some long place names, and that's meaning the word plumbers or your brand name is getting pushed off the end of the title in your snippet. So then that would be a negative impact on traffic. Or it could be that the ranking impact is negative for some reason. It could be that Google is just favoring the other title tag format from a ranking perspective. So after we've run the test and we've got, in this example, let's say it's a positive result, we can reflect back on why that was. So in this case, positive could be from CTR, could be from rankings. And later I'll talk about how we can drill into more data on that. But either way that the test goes, we have reasoning to back it up. We've already thought through the positive and negative connotations of the change we're making. So we're not surprised when we see the result and we have an explanation for it. So we've said what we know, we've said what we expect the impact to be, and then the final part is how we know. And for search pilot tests, they're generally measured on organic traffic against a forecast, like I showed you earlier. This part of the hypothesis generally for SEO tests is pretty similar across the board. We think that we'll know by testing organic traffic for the variant group of pages compared to a forecast, and we'll measure the impact on that group. So with those three sections, we have our hypotheses for our tests, which is great. But the next thing we need to do is prioritize them, because we need to give ourselves the best chance of positive results as soon as possible. And that's one of the main reasons we wrote the hypotheses is because now we're in a stronger place to be able to prioritize them. The way we generally do this at SearchPilot, and something we recommend anyone who's running an experimentation program does, is you give them each a score out of 5 for 3 different categories. So ease of implementation, likelihood of a positive result, and the scale of the impact. And the priority score here, these are all random numbers, by the way, don't read too much into it, but the priority score here is multiplying those 3 numbers together. So the bigger the number, the higher priority it should be. So in this case, it's test 104, test 105 have high priority scores, and we should line those up to be run sooner rather than later. This is a very simple version of this. It's worth considering whether you need to tweak the weightings potentially. So if you have a lot of resources for test building, ease of implementation is not as important a factor. Whereas if you're willing to take more risks, the likelihood of positive impact is less important than the scale of impact. If you're willing to take a risk that something might be negative, but there's a chance it will have a big positive impact, then you're going to want the scale of impact score to be the key one feeding into that formula for the priority. So that gives us this section of the flowchart. We have fed in our background information. We've created strong hypotheses, we prioritize them. How do we translate that then into strong tests? And that's where we come onto the test analysis side of it. We want to analyze the results to make sure we're getting the most out of all those tests that we're running. Generally, when we're running tests, there are 3 possible outcomes. First of all, positive. These are great. It might seem obvious, but we always celebrate when we run a test that turns out to be positive. These are the most direct way to provide ROI. They give us insight into how Google works and how the competitive landscape is, and give us a great springboard for more test hypotheses off the back of a positive test. Next up, negative tests. They're also incredibly useful. They give us a lot of insight into how Google works, what tactics are ineffective as well as effective. The other thing to remember is sometimes we're testing changes that the SEO team or another team might have just rolled out anyway without the ability to test, but we can still assign a negative impact to these kinds of tests, which means we're avoiding that negative change that otherwise would have just been rolled out across the website. We see this a lot when there's CRO or like product changes that get rolled out without considering the SEO impact. When we are able to test those, we can add this data point to say, okay, it's great for your product, except there's this negative traffic impact. So we can also then use those numbers to contribute to the overall ROI of the testing program. And the final group, which is actually the most common test outcome, about 60% of the tests we run at SearchPilot are inconclusive. What this means is we don't have enough statistical evidence to call them positive or negative. Either they didn't have a strong enough impact on traffic, or there was just too much noise in the data to be able to measure any impact. That doesn't mean it's a waste of time. There's always more insight that we can gain from a test result, as I'll come on to in a later section. Just to explain these charts as well, because there's a key point here around how we report on tests, and this is something that was covered in the previous topic as well. But that shaded region around the line, that is the confidence interval. And it's because that confidence interval here is across the positive and the negative that we would call this an inconclusive result. Whereas this one, the confidence interval is fully below the axis, so it's a negative result. When we're reporting on the impact of any test, we'll always report that range because nothing is ever 100% certain. If we just gave a single number for the impact, it would be a misleading approach. So with those inconclusive tests, we always then consider what we call the default to deploy thought process methodology. If a test has a strong hypothesis, which means there's strong evidence behind it, it's not a speculative kind of roll of the dice change. It's not let's try a new title tag format. We believe this is the right thing to do. And it's not too resource intensive to deploy that across the website. So basically the top right corner of this 2x2 grid, it's generally worthwhile to make that change on the balance of probabilities without insisting on that statistical significance. So if the test is truly inconclusive and it's a change you would have done anyway, it's not going to be too resource intensive for your developers, roll it out, because we're doing business, not science, as we often like to say, and we've proven that it's unlikely to do harm on the balance of probabilities. This is another reason why having strong hypotheses is key, because then it means we can make those changes, make those positive impacts to the site with a lower bar of confidence in the result. So that's how we analyze tests to draw the most insight out of them. Final section here is about iterative testing. So this is the key part of what makes this into an engine rather than just a process where we put ideas in and get results out. This is the cycle where the result of any test, positive, negative, inconclusive, should feed back in to that hypothesis refinement stage. It should give us more test ideas. So one way we could do this is going back to the hypothesis and drilling into why it saw the impact that it did. It could be that it's a very device-specific hypothesis. It could be a layout change on one device type or another. And we can drill into the data on the device level impacts to see if that could be a future test where we try it on a different device type. It could be that a certain group of pages were effective disproportionately compared to the rest of the group, in which case learnings from that should feed into the next test you run. We've also, in the last few months, started looking at Google Search Console data as a supplemental data source to the analytics, like sessions data is the key metric. Search Console helps us see click-through rate and rankings data. It's not perfect. There's issues with how average rank is calculated, sampling in the data, but it gives us a level of insight into, okay, did the control group or the variant group see more of an impact on rankings or click-through rate? And then feed that back into our hypothesis where we're looking at those levers to say, okay, this result impacted click-through rate primarily. Was our hypothesis related to click-through rate? Did we consider all the potential outcomes that it could have when we were deciding to run this test? So to sum up, those are the three areas that really build that engine. Strong hypotheses, analyzing the results to drill into the detail of why we saw a particular outcome, and then iterative testing, feeding the outcomes of a test back into more test ideas. And this is the engine that we end up with. Solid SEO fundamentals and data sources are converted into strong hypothesis with a clear link to the impact. They can then be prioritized and run as experiments. Then based on the analysis of the result, decisions are made about how to proceed, whether to roll changes out, whether not to, and then building that engine by iterating on those test ideas, go to make sure there's always a strong supply of strong hypotheses. We've got a bit of time for questions. I've seen a couple already in the chat. Here's a QR code to sign up to our case study email address in case you missed it. And yeah, see more resources. So the white paper, which covers a lot of this ground and goes into more detail on realizing the value. We've got, like I said, time for questions. If you need to drop off, you can email me directly there as well. You can also book a meeting with the Search Pilot team using the link through that QR code. Yeah, thank you everyone for your time. I'm just going to open up the chat now. I can see a question from Colton. With normal A/B tests, MDE, minimal detectable impact, it's important to know what the required sample size is to detect an effect. Even if you reach statistical significance, even if you don't have a large sample size, you can't trust the results. How does that translate to SEO split testing? That's a great question and something, I don't know if you're in the previous session, but I went into it a little bit there. Happy to go over it again though. So we're not using that same kind of traditional CRO methodology, where so in traditional CRO tests, you predefine what your sample size needs to be for the and certain power. If you don't reach that, then that's it. It's not a significant result. In SEO testing, we look at a time series approach, so we're looking at the data over time. And essentially, the more data you have, and in this case, that means number of pages in your test, a number of sessions to those pages. Basically, it means your model is better and the test can be concluded quicker because you reach that level of statistical significance sooner. It also means the minimum detectable impact is smaller. So if you have a really big site section with a lot of pages and a lot of traffic, you can measure impacts on the order of 1 or 2% minimum, whereas with a smaller site section, maybe it's 5 to 10%. That all being said, that default to deploy methodology, which I think I came on to after you asked your question, Colton, that really helps on those borderline cases. So, like I said, we do business, not science. We're interested in what is more likely to have a beneficial impact, the thing we're changing or the previous version. And we don't need to rely on some arbitrary level of significance, like the 95% level that is the standard. We can look at the data and say, it seems like on the balance of probabilities, B is better than A, so let's roll B out across the site. Yeah, there's more specifics on the sample size question in the previous session and on our website. So yeah, definitely have a look at that if you haven't already. And then second question, which methodology do you use to create the confidence intervals? Is it a parametric approach? So that one, it's our own like home-built neural network system. So originally, way back kind of when I first started working on SEO testing 5 years ago, we used Google's cause and impact model to build that forecast based on the control. We basically, it was good, but we've improved upon it by building our own neural network system. Obviously, we can't go into too much detail on exactly how that works because it's, yeah, fundamental to our product. We have released some changes to that this year, so I think there's some public statements on that on our website. Don't know if Em's in the chat, she can maybe find a link to that if that would be helpful. But yeah, we're constantly working on improvements to that to improve the sensitivity there. Causal impact, if you're doing this yourself, is definitely a good starting point. Feeding in the control group and the pre-test traffic for the variant group to build out our forecast is a really good starting point for sure. And then Cam has asked, I'm in a franchise system where operations and local marketing efforts vary by location. What are different ways to pick control versus sample test groups to reduce risk of local changes impacting test results? That is a great question. So we work with some companies who have a similar kind of setup where there's international domains. It's the main one I'm thinking of. It could be one company with 20 websites for each country they operate in. And there's a couple of different approaches we take. One is treat every different location, different country in this case, as its own website and subdivide the pages within that site as the control and variant group. So to reiterate, we need a templated group of pages. The example we talk about on a travel site would be like flight destination pages, where you've got hundreds, maybe thousands of URLs with the same template. So if you had that for each of the local markets you're talking about, you can subdivide the pages within each of those and run them as independent tests. The other thing we can do, and we often do if each of those individual countries are smaller and don't have as many pages or as much traffic, is we run compound tests where we take the entire set of pages across all of the different domains or the different locations and run one big test essentially across all of them. Yeah, I think what you're saying about local changes impacting the test results, the way we account for that is by making sure each of those different local sites has a good split of control invariant within it, as well as the overall split across multiple domains. It's not necessarily easy to do if traffic levels are lower or if you don't have as many pages, but yeah, that's the best recommendation I can make there. Check in the chat as well, because I think that's the same question there. Anyone else with any questions? If anything comes up afterwards, my email's there, or you can contact the Search Product team. But yeah, thank you everyone who's attended for your time. And yeah, the recording of this will be published as well, so people can access it later. But yeah, another link there to the white paper I mentioned, and you can find all our other resources through that as well. Just going to give another 30 seconds in case any other questions come up, but if not, I will end it there. Okay, it doesn't seem like there are, so thanks everyone for your time, and yeah, get in touch if you have any other questions. Cheers.